All right, so I went to my class last night, and somebody had posed the question, or well, it wasn't really a question, I guess. Well, maybe it was. I don't know. I don't know how she said it exactly. What she said was that um, she's trying to tune into the guidance, right? So a lot of us will talk about like the clairaudience and clairvoyance and all these different things and how stuff appears to us or how we receive messages and whatnot. And so I went into my little spiel from the other day where I had my little I said I started the day like up here. I was in a great mood, envisioning like all these wonderful things that I want for my life and like these other timelines and whatnot. And I said by the time I got to the end of the day, I ended up killing some time scrolling on social media, and it just wasn't in the same high vibe space that I had been early when I started the day. I said, the biggest thing was as soon as I shut my phone off and turned my light off and rolled over to go to bed, I got this message of, right. Why aren't you fucking writing? So, of course, Annie was kind of talking about how, you've been missing the message for a while if your guides are cussing at you. And I've been thinking about this point a lot here the past few days because it's like, it makes perfect sense to me why my guides would cuss at me or whatever. And if I make it to class next week, I'll probably take this then too. But it's like my entire life, I have allowed myself to get pulled along into whatever comes up around me. Like, I can see both sides of an argument, right? So if I hear two people's perspectives, I have no problem seeing and accepting both of those perspectives. And the problem I've had is more knowing where I end and where somebody else begins, like emotionally and energetically and all these things, right? So, and all my massive inclination to just shut down and go into crab mode and hide, the more that I try to be in tune with the direction that I'm meant to be going, when the things come up along the way that cause me to wobble, then yeah, I feel like, I guess, the guides or what, my higher self or whatever you want to call it, gets a little indignant at times. That's why I've talked on here before about how it's like, does my ego not work the same as other people's? Or like the information that I take in, because I've heard a lot of people that want to say that the ego is the loud voice and the intuitive side is more soft and not so panicky and all these things, right? And specifically on this point of when I was, okay, we'll go back to my wedding day, right? I never felt like that was a good situation for me to be into. And I've said many times, like, I feel like I found the worst possible option because I needed either my dad or my brother to say, he's not the one, do not go through this. So I figured, finding like the worst that there was, surely they would say something, right? But they didn't. So the day of my wedding, I, whereas most brides would be getting all fancied up and ready for the big day and all this stuff, I went to this entrance interview for seminary. on my wedding day. And of course, the thought that I had going into it was, well, they'll know I'm serious about this then, right? Because I'm doing this on my wedding day, because that's the day that they were doing the entrance interview, and so I agreed to go, so that would show them that I'm serious about being here, right? For this whole grad school seminary experience. But in truth, what it was me trying to avoid sitting with myself at all possible costs. Because I knew that if I had to spend too much time with that point of marrying this dude, I wouldn't have been able to go through with it. So I kept myself busy because I needed either my dad or brother to say something, and they didn't. So then I felt like I had to go through with it, right? So when I was walking down the aisle and everything, it's like that voice was, it was loud. It's like, do not do this. Do not do this. You do not have to do this, right? But nobody ever, like, those outside of me didn't say that I didn't have to do it. So that voice that was, that I'm tuning into on the inside, that is very, very emphatically saying, this is a bad idea. Don't do it. Don't go through with it. That was the one that I couldn't listen to, because I had been made to believe that I needed something outside of me to save me and to know better and all these things. So, so yeah, like the entire way down the aisle, I got this voice going, and, this intuitive voice chiming in with, do not, please do not, and just like all these things. And then when I kind of responded back with, but I feel like I have to. And then, get up there, and at one point, it's like, because I basically had to check out, because I didn't want to be there. Like, in truth, I did not want to be there. Especially since I felt like nobody else was saying anything, and I felt like I had to, because so much money had already been paid on this whole thing. My mom had said something. My mom saying something did not matter. It needed to come from my dad or my brother, because my mom, I've talked about her on here a lot. She, I've spent my lifetime with her living vicariously through me, so it's like, it can't come from her, right? So it has to be, going back to that whole, the whole idea of you are your father's property until you are your husband's property, because that's, one of those real wonderful church beliefs, right? And basically all that amounted to was the thing that I knew that I shouldn't do, I ended up doing, because the people outside of me that could have said something and could have mattered didn't say anything, right? But even though in hindsight they both admitted that they couldn't stand him, and they came up with like other reasons why they couldn't say something. Like my brother, he said by that point he had, he was in the Air Force. He spent several years where he was, in like there was Texas for a time, Mississippi briefly, Arizona. He was a few other places that weren't here. So, and we had kind of fallen out of touch because, I got my first cell phone my senior year in high school. And it didn't have all the fun things that they do now, right? So yeah, I would send messages back then and whatnot, but like there were only so many, or there was only so much I could do with the phone and everything, right? And like for that one specifically, my very first cell phone came from the guy that I was dating in high school. His parents got him one and got me one, so we wouldn't be tying up the phone lines all the time. So it was just kind of funny little callback, but that was the whole reason why I ended up with one at all. But so, like, back in those early days, it's like that wasn't a big thing to, like, just be texting all the time. I I'm pretty sure I could send messages, but I don't remember. Maybe I was watching Final Destination the other day, and somebody had like one of the Nokia phones. It's like, I think that might have been what I had back then. What all did they do? I don't even like, I don't know. I know it's not like all fancy and doesn't have all the things like this one does, but at the same time, you know, it was keep us off the actual phone. But like, for my brother to be elsewhere in the country, we just kind of lost touch, because while he was in the Air Force, okay, so I've been writing lately talking about like the undergrad experience and whatnot, right? So my brother, you know, he's 2.5 years older than me, but, you know, like my freshman year in high school was his senior year in high school. And so when it came to school beyond that, like, when, of course, same thing with undergrad, my freshman year was his senior year, but at that point he had his mode of doing undergrad back then wasn't real productive. He changed his major every semester until he finally, after 4 years in changing his major every semester, he finally dropped out and joined the Air Force, right? So I knew that I had to have a more focused path than that, because I didn't want to have 4 years to going to school and have nothing to show for it afterwards. So, you know, he went Air Force, and then I went to my undergrad experience at Ball State. And, you know, so he's in Texas and I'm in Muncie. So we kind of lost touch for a while because we had other things going on, right? So it was just like the time frame, and just, you know, with our lives, we'd gone our separate ways at that point in time, weren't really communicating that much. And so for him to see this guy and not like him at all, he felt like he'd been gone long enough that he didn't have any right to say anything to me, right? And it's like, all I was looking for was somebody to say something, because my life had taught me that what I knew for me, and in that case was, you know, this voice in my head the entire time, this intuitive voice saying, this is not right, do not do this is not the one. But not from the people that would have made a difference otherwise, you know, because my best friend at the time said something too, but she was just like my mom on that end of, she didn't try to live vicariously through me, but I've mentioned her, she was basically the fill-in for my mom while I was away from my mom, right? So I was trying to get some distance and some like space between me and my mom, and then I found this friend that ended up basically having this sort of role where she filled in on some of the things that my mom had done. So like, you know, the reason we stopped being friends after like 15 years, because during the pandemic, I don't even remember. I was all over the place. I do remember it. Okay, so I was just kind of all over the place. Anyway, it was after the divorce. I was having a whole lot of issues with anxiety on when my ex was going to somehow try to show up in my life again, right? So, you know, like the first year, okay? So I left Alabama in March 2019. In July 2019, the divorce was finalized. But by the time November rolled around, November's the month we got married, like the whole fall, my anxiety just continued to build, and I couldn't quite place what was going on at initially, but then I kind of had this sense of dread because I just knew he was going to try to reach out somehow. It's like I had him blocked on my phone. I had him blocked on, all the social media. I got a new email address that he didn't know and shouldn't know. Because I was just trying to get completely disconnected from him and never have to hear from him again. But like everything in me just started like getting really anxious because I'd seen how he had done with exes, right? So like his son's mother, obviously there's that whole shared child dynamic that complicates the fuck out of it. But the other one, there were at least 2 or 3 occasions that I found out that he had sent her an email or something. It's like, why? It's like, what's the point of it? Like one time it was to check to see if she still had the dog or the cat that they had together or whatever. It's like, you have no business in contacting her. What are you doing? And I know there was at least one other thing, and it was just like, just that knowing that he's had the history of reaching back out. I've seen how he treats his son's mother and, actively enjoys making her look crazy for like all the court stuff, especially, right? And all the stuff that he could do and say to get to her to make her look crazy for court. So right when he was or when we were in the process of getting divorced, he was trying to entice me into, fighting in court. Because at the end of the day, he didn't care if I got anything from him, from the divorce. What he wanted was me to waste a bunch of money to go back and forth between Indiana and Alabama while dealing with court shit. And also to prove that I was only ever after his money. And I think I've mentioned that before, but I just think it's funny that this kind of looks like the tire blew on this high rollover risk thing. Although after watching Final Destination, that doesn't really seem that encouraging. Anyway, back to the story. So he wanted me to want to get something out of him. He wanted to do that to make it look, to prove his story that I was only ever after his money, right? But I did not give a shit about it. And at the end of the day, it's like, I don't want to waste more money to have to go back and forth. And I know that the only thing he's interested in doing is making me feel crazy, right? Because that's what narcissists generally love to do, is to make you absolutely question yourself on all possible facets of existing, and especially your worth and value and all that stuff, and keep pushing that point until, ultimately to realize, in his case, that I just couldn't exist without him because I was so... Basically, I lost my sense of self-worth and, value, right? Because going into that whole thing with that intuitive voice saying, don't do this, he's not the one. It's like I knew before I knew, I knew how it was going to end up, but that is one of those things though. Like I always knew that divorce was on my path, because a big part of one of the questions that I posed for life in general and what I was trying to figure out in this existence was, what makes somebody get into a situation with somebody that they ultimately end up not wanting to be with, and not feeling like they can get out of it. What makes them feel stuck, right? How do they get so stuck? And the way to understand that experience is to live it, right? And there's a hot mess. It was a pain in the ass. But ultimately, I got lots of insight on that, right? And so when I was divorcing my ex, I divorced my entire belief system, because I realized that my beliefs and the things that I was hearing church adjacent were pulling me into this the sort of space of believing that, divorce is bad and should be avoided at all possible costs, even if it's essentially an abusive relationship. And it's like, no, I don't agree with that at all. But that's largely how you get stuck in those spaces, right? So that was my experience. That's what I learned, was my belief system was very detrimental and very much a big part of why I felt so stuck and had such a hard time getting out of it, right? So, like, family included, because, I've talked about the times that, because he didn't just do it once. There were like 2 or 3 occasions that my grandfather, in the span of time I was going through the divorce process, made a big deal about, well, my family doesn't get divorced, right? In the time where my cousin had brought her fiance to Easter, and then I exploded because I was like 2 to 3 weeks having moved out of Alabama and back to Indiana, and he's spouting off about, my family doesn't get divorced. It's like, yeah, because I'm not a part of this goddamn family. Cool. And there were several occasions that my dad would be watching some asshole pastor, and he'd be running his mouth about how bad divorce was, and, divorce amongst God's people, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, see, these are those things, right? So, like, when my dad was watching that shit, initially I just kind of took it in. But, the way I am now, that I've realized where a lot of that comes from, where, like, the bad beliefs and the feeling like I couldn't say anything or whatever, it's, largely because I felt very much stuck in that sort of flow state and not, I didn't have any kind of sense of myself, right? So, I've talked about the masculine aspect as the frame and the feminine aspect as the flow. And so, basically my entire life taught me that I wasn't supposed to have boundaries, and I was supposed to help everybody that I possibly could, and, always try to be good and nice and all these stupid things. And that I didn't belong to myself, right? That I had to rely on somebody else to say the things or do the things to give me permission to exist how I wanted to in the world, right? Like, I couldn't come up with that permission on my own just because out of wanting something, for me to want something for myself, I was made to believe that was a very selfish way to be. And it's like, fuck that, right? So, like, one of my biggest struggles, and, like, one of the big points on this whole twin flame journey for me, has been realizing that I already have the frame I need within, and kind of being able to flow through the safety of that framework, right? So that voice that was saying, don't do this, don't marry this guy, that was that ultimately the masculine aspect trying to prevent me from fucking myself over, right? And, like, even in the middle of the ceremony, like, as I kind of half checked out during the ceremony, the pastor said something about rings. I just, like, dropped my now ex's hand and, like, reached over for the ring, and then we're just standing there all awkwardly, not holding hands, not touching. That voice was like, see, he's not doing anything to fix this either. You're just standing up here awkwardly. Walk away. You do not have to do this, right? But I was still kind of arguing that point with myself anyway, because so much of my life had been wrapped up in believing this thought that I had to have something outside of me to save me. And obviously I realized that is not bullshit. So, so I went through with it, and then there were a bunch of things that happened that were basically the negative synchronicities. I was not supposed to be in that situation. While big picture, yes, I was, because that was how I got the experience and learned what I learned that I am meant to share with the world. For me specifically, my intuitive guidance that was saying, don't do this, but that it was having the demonstration of, I already knew within that he wasn't the one and that I had no business being in that space, but my sense of value had gotten, it had been chipped away by all the times I'd thrown myself away to believing anybody else's whims, right? So like my mom and her living vicariously through me, and then when I have something that ends well, like the drumline thing, and then she hijacks the moment by saying, I deserve this as much as you do. So it was like, okay, so I thought my being here as a leader of this group, no less, meant something, but you just demonstrated to me that it means absolutely jack shit. It's like, so I basically wasn't even here at all, was I? So it's like, I kind of walked away and abandoned that whole, my freshman year, I still came, I didn't come back all during the fall because I was in marching band, but the spring semester, I came home every weekend, and when there were drumline things, I went to the drumline things, because of course the first boyfriend, it was his senior year in high school, my freshman year in college, so he was still doing drumline, so I still went and checked out those, right? But after that, didn't matter. It was just I lost touch with everybody. It's like my existence here was nothing, and this wasn't my thing, so okay, and it's like, all right, so let's find something else, right? And I've touched on that a little bit too, about the different ways that I've been basically that I lost sight of what I was supposed to be doing, lost sight of who I was, lost all sense of self-esteem and value and the self-worth and all that stuff. It's like I lost all that by all these little ways that my life was chipping away at it. So, so going back to the original point of, when I start slipping and allowing myself to get pulled into things like the doom scrolling or whatever, rather than the thing that I'm supposed to be doing, which is the writing, yes, my my guidance is very loud and will cuss at me. Because I can be really stubborn and hard-headed, so it makes sense that is what I respond to, because it's also a reminder that it's literally that easy for me to slip back into bad habits. It's just 5 minutes doom scrolling suddenly becomes 20 minutes doom scrolling, and then where the hell did all that time go, and what could you have been doing that you should have been doing that you stopped doing, right? In that case, right. And it was right, fucking right. Why aren't you fucking writing? Right? So, and I think I mentioned the other day, it's when I had that thought come to mind, the thing that flashed into, kind of the clairvoyant side of things, if you will. It's like I went back to the posters that I have hanging up in my office, and it's like I saw them and read them right there. So, right, the universe provides, trust the process, right? But, you know, it's like the one thing that I will do, hands down, like I try not to avoid, I think there's been like a handful of times that I've missed it, is the journaling thing. You know, and I mentioned, or I talk about them, the Twin Flame books, because I always, like, anytime I was journaling before, it's like when it was just me or for me or whatever, I felt disconnected from it. And it was easy to wander off and not go back to it. So when I started writing as though I was writing to the Twin Flame, and you know, this is basically documenting everything that's going on, everything that I'm learning, this whole journey. When I started doing it focused as this is going to be shared with somebody else someday, it makes it a lot easier to stick to. And like that was one of the things I really struggled with in the time, like I was even with my ex, was because I knew there was nothing, like the stuff that I was writing down, I wanted no part of him actually knowing what was going on, which was another way that I actually, you know, felt very unsafe in that space and was demonstrating that. It's like I couldn't be fully honest in what I was writing down, because if I was writing about him and the ways he'd been pissing me off lately, and he read it, then, you know, he was going to make my life a living hell from that point, right? So it's like, it was just never safe, so I just kept, like, chucking it. And I don't even know how many journals I had that I didn't even finish, because I would, like, get started, and I would make a whole lot of progress on them, and start really learning some useful things about myself, making some interesting connections, and then something would come up with him, and then it's just like wandered off, and it ended up in storage, and then that was the end of it. You know, I think the time that I was best about it was when we first moved down to Alabama, and we were staying in this fancy apartment in Daphne, Alabama, across the bay from where his work was. It was a nice area. And it was a nice apartment. The unfortunate part was we had to have a 2-bedroom apartment because, you know, he was trying to get custody of his kid, and for that to happen, the court had to see that he had a place where the kid had his own bed, and, you know, he wasn't going to be just laying on the couch or whatever, which, what the fuck's wrong with that? And although we didn't have a couch, that was the problem on that end. But, like, for some reason, you know, and that could have just been bullshit that he was spewing at me, was that we had to have this whole other room. So we ended up getting this more expensive apartment than we even needed, because we had his kid with us when we were looking for the apartment. So we end up with this place that's got 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and then the kid was with us when we were looking for the space, 3333. But then as soon as I took him back home, that was it. He never went back to that apartment. Actually, I don't know that he ever went to that apartment. I feel like he should have. He was there, like, yeah, he would have been. I was also, I had a semester that I was doing with seminary where I didn't have to be present, so it was like online stuff, and kind of, I had a teacher that I was checking in with, and had to meet with him in person, like, just a couple times during the semester. So, like, one of those times was when I took the kid back up here to be with his mom again. So, yeah, we did have the kid for a little while in the apartment. That was, like, the only time, right? And then he never went back. So we were paying, like, some god-awful amount on this 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment, and we only needed 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom because we didn't have the kid anymore. But yeah, it was just a complicated ordeal. But anyway, like in that time, like after the kid was back up here, there was this little cubby area. It had like a little built-in desk, and I had a little stool, and it was like over by the 2nd bedroom. And so I would spend some time over there writing, and it's like I would get really pissed off at something that my ex was doing or saying, and like I would start writing about that and getting in touch with my feelings about what was actually going on and the awareness of what was actually going on. And you know, it got me to the point where that year or that time, it was 2015 when we moved down there, I believe. Yes, because 2014 he took the job that got us down there, and he had 2 months in Alabama where I stayed up here, and then had 6 months in Germany. So I was staying with my parents at that time too, because I wasn't down there by myself. Yeah, so I got myself to the point, it's like I was infuriated with the way things were going in that connection. And so our anniversary was November 30th, and I left December 1st, just packed my shit up and left. Of course, we didn't have very much in that place. And I didn't say anything to him. Like, I just packed it up while he was at work, and, you know, I had my vibe back then, and got Ziva, and we left. And he got back and was pissed, you know, but I was like already several hours up the road at that point, I think, or a few hours up the road. You know, and the interesting thing is when I was revisiting that during the like the conversations, so I've talked about when I was putting things together for his custody case, I got to read the messages because, of course, you know, I discovered there's this app, Textra or whatever, and you could print entire conversations off. So we had a lot of stuff that were relevant, that we had in our conversations with family members. Like, for an example, something that was used in court was a part of a conversation that my mom and I had where we had talked about specifically knowing that she was up to something, and that was the only reason we were getting the kid for his spring break that year. You know, and we even told the kid that when he kind of made a joke about something his mom had told him to do, and we were just kind of like, okay, we're gonna have a talk about this. I said, you know, I told him then, I said, we wanted to spend the time with you. I said, but we have been very, very aware that the only reason your mom is allowing us to have you down here with us for 2 weeks is because she intends to do something to try to prevent us from being able to see you again. I said, but we wanted to spend the time with you, so, you know, we had to take that chance. But we knew specifically that she's looking for something to use so that we're not able to in the future, right? And, of course, his dad was, like, way less decent about it. He was, because, of course, he was pissed, which, in that situation, it absolutely made sense. But whereas my ex was more inclined to allow the kid to think that he was mad at him, it's like, no, we're not. We are not going to let that be the case because it is not the kid's fault. You know, it's like that entire connection was just them going back and forth on weaponizing the child against each other, however they could. Right? But anyway, the point of that was the conversation that I had with my mom in advance of having the kid down there for his spring break was, we know she's up to something. We don't know what it is, but we want to spend time with the kid, so that's what we're going to do. Like a bug or something bite me. Now it's all itchy and now it's all red. But yeah, so the Textra thing, right? for that app and for putting the custody case together, which of course is all on me. I was the one connecting the dots and all that stuff. I read the conversation that had taken place between my ex and his brother, where he was making fun of me. Not his brother, my ex, right? He was specifically making fun of me, and yeah, she can't do anything without her family and blah, blah, blah. So, it's like, keeping in mind that most of what I've talked on here, like on my channel, has been stuff with my family, and, the being so deeply enmeshed in this toxic situation and not realizing it, right? That's been the biggest part of the journey. So then when I'm in this connection with this toxic person outside of my family, to have this other family space with, and he's actively making fun of me. There was a lot of it that was behind my back, but there was a lot of it that was not. Right? He would say the things to me, which was largely why I had so much self-doubt, was because I would be down there and I would be experiencing what he was saying and doing, and I would absolutely loathe what I was going through and what I was experiencing from him. But because I would talk myself out of the journaling side of things so easily, because, there again, I didn't want him reading them, but like in the time that I was, we're in this little apartment and I was writing more often and able to retain it and go back to this, like when I've written it down and then I revisit it, I can go straight back into those feelings and know where I was at, so then I channeled all that energy into getting my ass up out of there, just for him to be trash talking me behind my back and also to my face, because that was something that he kept saying, was you just can't do anything without your family. And like once I got back home, and of course he's talking about how much my family hates him, and they did, which is why it's really aggravating that my dad and my brother didn't say something when I needed them to. But at the same time, that was a big part of the lesson for me, the whole lesson process, right? And so I got infuriated because of shit with him. Like in the times that I was leading up to leaving, I did not communicate with my family that much, unless it was specific things about, okay, the first time that my family had to come up to help me move back, which was 2017, in that time, they of course were having to plan to come get me. So, the rental truck and all this stuff, and they needed a new vehicle anyway, but they got one specifically for the purpose of being able to tow a trailer so they could bring me back. And so of course that's the vehicle everybody likes best. That's the Edge. But yeah, so part of the reason they got it was because of me. So that's fun. But then once I would end up back up here because I had to move back in with them, and they were trash talking him, then I would suddenly second guess everything that I'd written, and it's like, were they just in my head? I don't know, right? Because I knew it was toxic, but then when I wouldn't write regularly and make a point of facing it, right, giving the words to the emotions for myself even, when I wasn't able to see it on paper and refer back to specific moments that, or the specific things he'd said or done, then I was just like suddenly second guessing it when I was around my family, because I was hearing them talk about how glad they were I left him because he was such a horrible person. And it's like, now I don't know if I left because of me or if I left because of them. So I would end up going back, right? So, yeah. But there again, going back to that point on when it's like there's so much pulling at me in general that if I start getting wishy-washy, then yes, my guidance is going to get very loud and no, you're not doing this again. And, you know, cussing, yes, absolutely. But, you know, I've talked about that a lot too. It's like, when I was in undergrad, I would have like these binders that had like, you know, the sleeves where you could put stuff in them, right? So the front, I would have like some kind of song lyrics. Like I know one specifically I had, the band was Downhere, I think, and the song was Calmer of the Storm. And I love that song. It's still a good song. I disagree with, you know, the church views on Jesus kind of things now. So it's like, most of like what I would listen to back then, it's like, I don't know that I really have space to give a shit about that now. I would have to revisit the song and see how much specific churchy bullshit is in it to have a sense of whether I would, you know, I still agree with it or not, right? But the idea, the calmer of the storm, that, you know, there's this other thing that even when you have all this anxiety and all this stuff going on around you, and the earth is shaking beneath your feet or whatever, it's like there's still this bigger thing out there that, you know, isn't so easily swayed by all the little human-y feelings and whatnot, and, you know, it sees them and can appreciate them, but isn't affected by the big emotions, right? If there's one thing I can do, it's big emotions. So, yeah. So I always just really liked that song. But like on the back of them, I would put like a Bible verse, because of course it have to be on the back, and then that way, if you're walking around and you have this thing, then somebody might actually read the Bible verse, right? So then you're like sharing churchy bullshit with people that didn't ask for it, just because you're good and you have the belief and all this stuff, right? So it's like, yeah, that's cool. But anyway, like I had this, so I put the Bible verses in there, a song up front, Bible verse on the back, and it wasn't like, I don't know that I put that much thought into that point beforehand. Like when I was doing it, I just felt like I also wanted a Bible verse on there, and I think to me I wanted the lyrics closer to me of the songs that I really loved, and so that was more of the space that I was operating from. But yeah, when I take a step back and I think about like the actual meaning of what behind what I was doing, there was that element of, you know, other people are going to have to read this book now, right? if they look at my stuff, and then it's right there, and they're just going to have to read it, right? So anyway, so I had this binder, and when I moved back from college, my brother was, you know, he was in the Air Force, so I had a bunch of stuff in the closet in his room. And I was basically having a spiritual temper tantrum one day. It was like, I have no problem calling it that way. And like, that's a big part of why my guidance is so loud and in my face, because I've chronically had the tendency of tuning it out, because I want to do what I want to do anyway. Like, you know, this day it was, I know God is real and all of these things, and I know that there's something more that I'm supposed to be doing, but I still want to have these aggravated feelings right now. And, you know, it's like, I don't remember what exactly was going on, but it's like, I wanted to be mad about it, right? I was literally just having a spiritual temper tantrum. And so, I went to look for something else in this closet. And because I was having this spiritual temper tantrum, one of the things that happened as I was digging around, at the top of the closet, this binder falls out, cracks me in the head, like I think the corner was on the top of my head, and then hits the floor and falls Bible verse side up. And it was, I think the verse was something to the effect of, faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see. Something to that effect. But it was so relevant to the moment, and I had to laugh because it was obviously a message meant just for me in that moment when I'm having the spiritual temper tantrum. And then here's this Bible verse, this binder cracks me in the head to get my attention, and then falls face up, falls Bible verse up, so I have to read it. I was like, oh. Yeah, I get it. So it also, kind of breaks the tension on that end where I'm like so stubbornly hard-headed and trying to avoid what's going on. So yes, it's loud and yells at me because otherwise it's easy to kind of, no, I'm not going to do that right now because I want to do what I want to do. Right. So if I'm not doing what I know I'm supposed to be doing, which writing, then it's going to come back. Right. So, right, fucking right. Why aren't you fucking writing? Yeah, it makes sense for me. Right. So, yeah, and it's just, I'm a hardhead. I have no problem owning up to that. I'm chronically very stubborn, and it's usually to my own detriment, right? So yeah. Now, that said, not all of it is that way. Like, if I'm in a good mood and a good space, I can receive the messages really easy, and it doesn't have to come through like the yelling and cussing at me. But because I do have that tendency to shift, just go back into flowing in places that I have no business flowing in, then yeah. Then yeah, it can get loud and noisy and cranky. But it's always how you need it is how you will receive it. I think the big thing on that point. But yeah, I kind of want to go back and share that with the class. I don't know if I'll be going this next week. Gonna depend on if I get the money together for it again, which $20 handles me going to class and also the little restaurant afterwards, because class is $11 and then I usually get a grilled chicken quesadilla at the restaurant, and I'm there for the fellowship of like-minded individuals as much as anything else. So yeah, but it's like then I can spend the money on the class and the thing, and then that's my fancy night out and my socialization space. So yeah, you know what, I might just have that be its own thing today. Oh, the writing thing. I said the other day when the last video I did that I was going to write and post it on Vocal. What ended up happening was, as I started writing, it's like, this is first chapter stuff. It's like it's like I needed to start and actually start building up the momentum of doing the thing. And it's like I thought Vocal media as a means of getting started and just having little short things. I think that's kind of the bigger part, is I don't really do short things, do I? It's like to make a short story, to make a short story long, that's more me. But like anyway, I'm not gonna start onto that again. I've said that enough. But yeah, like once I started in on it, and I don't even know what day that was. I know the past couple of days I have been prioritizing adding to it. It's like this is book direction. This is very much what I'm supposed to be doing for that. And there's like a half a thought. It's like right there, and I can't quite grab it. Oh, this has nothing to do with anything, but I just okay. So my little oil change sticker says my oil needs to be changed at 162,529 miles, right? And the date on it is 6/25. So 6/25 and 6/25. That got my attention and just made me think. Today is the 21-year anniversary of my dad's dad passing away. And so that too is one of those numbers that kind of follows me, 925. Not as much as the Jum numbers, which that was my great-grandfather. So that was like the 37. Or my great-grandmother, 515. That's a big one for her. Twin flame stuff. And Tyler numbers. Like those, my great-grandparents and Tyler and the twin flame. Those are the ones that I see the most often. And so, like, I'll see the ones for, like, my dad's parents, but it takes longer for me to register those because, I mean, like, my grandfather, I think we probably would have been close had it not been for the fact that he couldn't hear for jack shit and refused to get a hearing aid, claiming it would make him look old, but I think the bigger thing was he didn't want to hear my grandmother, right? So it's like, there again, another one of those toxic connections that where they should never have been married to begin with, probably, but yet, based on, generationally speaking, and the more need to be in the connections as much as anything, they were together for, I think, 64 years or something like that. I think she said it was. Sometime after my grandfather died, my grandmother wrote to me and said that it would have been their whatever anniversary. It was 60 something. But it's like, how can you claim that as this big wonderful thing if one of the stories I remember, I don't remember them ever, being lovey-dovey with each other or anything like that. What I remember is hearing the stories about, like, there was one time my grandmother tried to run my grandfather over with his pickup truck, and my grandfather tried to run my grandmother over with a tractor. It's like, that's not a healthy situation to be in, right? But that makes sense for how my parents ended up together, because they both came from toxic parents, or a toxic connection, and so it's normal for them. Which there again is another one of those pieces of why my journey has been what it is, and why I'm supposed to be writing about it, because I think that's actually something that, like, these are issues that have been passed on through generations, so it's time to change those, right? So I think like the biggest part of my whole YouTube channel thing, somebody commented the other day about giving a voice to those who have gone through similar things but haven't had the words to put to it. It's like, I think that is a big part of what I am supposed to be doing across the board, and especially writing and all that stuff as well. So, because this whole toxic system, the only way to rebuild is to acknowledge the toxicity and the need for change, right? So today's the anniversary of my grandfather's passing away. But I think he refused to get the hearing aid because he didn't want to hear my grandmother. And, I've talked a lot about how, like, my mom's approach to dealing with me and asking too many questions or anything was just, make me feel as bad as possible and shame me out of using my voice, right? Which there again is another one of those issues that has to be confronted for not just me, for whoever might find whatever I have to talk about, right? Last night I was thinking about some of the deeper, harder things to include, or that need to be included in the book. And like the one thing was kind of a big contributing factor of, you know, my the ongoing constant suicidal ideation for several years, right? So it's like this big underlying component. It's like also the thing that I felt like I was supposed to talk to the ex, my ear's buzzing now, the ex that I thought I was going to marry. Early on in our connection, we were talking, you know, I was talking to him about the suicidal ideation and whatnot, and I got this really strong sense that I was supposed to tell him about this other piece, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. And because I couldn't bring myself to do it, you know, because I wasn't accepting myself for having had this experience, it became this thing that I didn't talk about, that I had accepted that I was, you know, unlovable because I'd done this thing. And then since I didn't give him the opportunity to know that about me, I ended up, you know, becoming a shell of myself anyway. And I was never, it's like there was always this thing that I can't talk to him about, right? But it's like, you know, so last night I'm thinking about putting it in the book, and it's like, yep, that's one of those things. It's like, if it helps one person, then it will have been worth it, right? Going back to that thought process when I was, you know, going to church all the time and whatnot. And that was after the fact, but still. You know, like that was the big motivating factor for my life, was whatever I have to go through, or whatever needs to be included in the story that I have to share to help somebody else that's been through that experience in some kind of way, then okay. Right? Because that's the one thing I'm pretty good about, is being authentically me, even if, you know, people want to judge me for it or whatever. And, you know, I've been judged by people all my life, so why wouldn't that be a thing, right? So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is like some of the things that I have, well, all of the things that I have gone through, I realize now how they were preparing me for this path. Like the bigger things that I was always meant to do, the talking through things and sharing things, right? So, or like that point of, you know, I spent my whole life basically believing that I was a whore, because that was the impression that I was picking up from the world around me, including my own family, you know, because of this thing that came up with my cousin trying to enlighten me at a time that I wasn't in a good headspace, because I just lost my great-grandfather, and then my dog ended up dying that same year. The dog that was like, you know, my first dog, and he was like my protector and all these things. And then, you know, then I end up losing those, and because those were like two of the most important things in my life, then somebody else is able to come in with this bad idea, and I just go along with it because I didn't know any better, right? You know, which is another part of this. And I was kind of thinking the other day, it's like, on the one hand, it's like, I feel like I will get married again, right? So, on that end, I've never really loved the Jones name, because, I mean, it's so boring. And because there's so many, right? And, you know, it's like, that name never seemed like it really completely fit for me. My throat is getting scratchy all at once. Like, which takes me to basic training, and they constantly got my name wrong. It's like, Jones is an easy name. Why are you getting that fucked up? But it's fucked up because it doesn't fit, right? Because I have a big energy, and there's like, it's like there's something about me that is meant to stand out, right? So So I have this boring name, and it's like I've spent my whole life knowing it didn't fit. And that was probably also part of why I kind of pushed the marriage situation once that whole thing came up again, or that whole thing came up as a possibility, after the other one had gone so miserably wrong. But yeah, so I was thinking, it's like, so for this book, it's like this first book, it's like I feel like this is the thing that I have to do this, but it's like I don't feel like I'm meant to hold out on getting married before I actually get this thing done and published and whatnot, right? But then it's like, well, but then I feel disconnected from the first thing that I write versus anything else that I write if I were to get married and be using a different name. It's like there'd be that disconnect, right? But then I was thinking about it, and it's like there are a lot of people that once they go through like a spiritual awakening of some sort, change their name like completely, because it's no longer Tesla truck. Those things are ugly. Because it's no longer, or it doesn't fit who they are anymore, right? So then it's like, no, I feel like that's kind of the point of this, is like, get all the old junk out of my system, the old story, put it out there for anybody to find, and then, whatever happens, right? And, yeah, I'm not going to be as immediately connected to it if I change my name later on. But that's not a bad thing, right? Especially for this to be the old story. Yeah. We were having a conversation at dinner last night, and I told them, like, somebody was talking about being bright and colorful, and then going into, like, the space where she was getting, or she had people looking down on her because of how she was dressed, because she was bright and colorful, and they weren't. And it's like, I said, I kind of, it's like my whole thing is basically the crayon box exploded, right, or threw up, because I tend to be bright and colorful, and the 80s just kind of, that's my thing today. But I had roller skate earrings on earlier, but I decided not to put those back on after I took them off. Yeah, but like we were talking last night, and I said, that is one of those things. I said, this feels really weird to say, but I said, I have come to realize that one of my most important purposes is just getting out and being seen. And I said, a big part of that is like, I figured this out like June of last year, 2024. It's like I just got this really strong sense that I was just supposed to go out and be seen. And I said, I said in the video that I did, that I talked about that last year, that basically it's like energetically walking around and just kind of tapping people on the shoulder. So maybe they don't even pay any attention at the time that, our paths cross, or maybe they do, but when the time's right, they will. And I said, I think like one of the biggest things is just the value in going out and being seen and demonstrating that it is safe to be seen now, right? That it's safe to, Annie pointed out, even to speak up and to use your voice. It's like, yes, it's finally, because I'm finally feeling safe myself to be able to do these things. That's part of the message that I meant to to convey on that end, I think. And I'm going to say, I think it is time to wrap this up now, because like my voice is doing something weird and my throat's feeling really scratchy all at once. And I think I want my water, but my water's at home. So yeah, I think I wrapped everything up for the time being anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and call it. As always, I appreciate you. Until the next time. See ya.